Okay. So like I said, this afternoon we're going to do an overview of how to begin the process of transforming your CV to a resume. And just to get started, here is the breakdown of what we're going to talk about this afternoon. There are some differences between a CV and a resume. So to start, we're going to go into a little bit of information about those differences between the two types of documents. As I mentioned before we started recording, I'm also going to walk you through a process of step-by-step, essentially, of how to begin making that change. How do you change your CV to a resume? And then I'm going to allow some time to wrap up, ask some questions, get your thoughts if there was anything that was unclear. So that's what we're going to go through today. So a quick overview, and just to be clear, this is a US view of the difference between a resume and a CV. In other countries, a CV is sometimes used for the application document, even if it does mirror what in the US would be called a resume. So just to make that distinction, in the US, there's a clear delineation between a CV and a resume, and we're going to go through what those differences are. So a CV in the US is typically more for an academic audience. So if you're thinking about a position within the academy, tenure track positions, things like that, that would typically be what you would use a CV for. Also, research intensive positions typically will ask for a CV, not all, but many will. In comparison to a resume that is usually associated with a non-academic audience, so your industry positions and so on. A slight, maybe a caveat to this is the federal resume. So for US federal government positions, that tends to mirror more of a CV, even though we call it a resume, but it's pretty lengthy. And anybody who's had experience with that, you're probably familiar with what I'm talking about. Federal resumes are a very different type of experience that, can certainly be covered at another time. A CV is usually a little bit more broader, and we'll show you some examples of how the resume digs into more details and the expectation of what is communicated in those details. So how that information is shared on a resume versus a CV is a little different in the level of description and detail that it goes into. And most commonly, what people know as the difference between a resume and the CV is length. So a CV doesn't technically have a number of pages limitation. You see some levels there depending on where you are in your academic studies, but really a CV can be as long as it needs to be. And some of you may have seen other faculty members who have pretty extensive CVs at this point because of publications, grants, and those kinds of things. So there's really no page restriction for CVs. For the resume, on the other hand, that's a little different. And this is where it becomes a challenge for students because they are put to the situation where they need to potentially convert a multiple page CV into 1 or 2 page resume. And that can get challenging depending on how much experience you have. Now, whether or not it's 1 or 2 pages also depends on the industry. So we're going to talk about a little bit later on in this workshop how to find that information, because that can be very important to you as an applicant going through this process. Some sectors in particular will be looking for a 1-page resume. That's more the norm, and others might welcome a 2-page resume. And with some positions, you may actually see that they will accept a resume or a CV, and in that case, you do have a little bit more latitude with the length of the document. So that's just a quick overview of the differences between CVs and resumes. We're going to go through the process and dig into how to make that transformation moving forward now, and you'll be able to see a little bit more how that comes into play. So the first step in converting your CV to a resume that I suggest is to get all of your materials in one place. Collect any documentation you have about your performance, letters of recommendations, awards you received, certifications, licensures relevant to your field, anything that you may have, and get all of that information together in one place. The last bullet point that I have on here is referring to something called the master resume, and that is a potentially very lengthy document that captures everything. It really has everything on there that you can possibly think of. All of your experiences, all of your education, anything you think you could potentially use down the road for applications, for positions that you're interested in. The master resume does not have to adhere to any page limitations because nobody else is ever going to see it but you. It's really just a source document for you to work off of. And what I mean when I say that is you have your master resume that might be 10 or so pages long. And then when you find a position that you're interested in, you transfer over the information and the experiences that are relevant to that position and leave behind the things that maybe aren't as applicable for the purpose of that application. Building the master resume can be a little cumbersome at first, but it can save you some time later on because you're not reinventing a resume every time you need to apply. You can go back to this master resume, collect the information you need from it, and then use it for your application. I also like a master resume just as a place for me to collect all of my past experiences so I know they're in one place. And that's just been very helpful for even background checks and things like that. So like I said, it can take a little bit of time to put the master resume together, but in the long run, it should save you some time. So just something to consider. Format doesn't necessarily need to be a big thing with the master resume. Again, it's just a collection of all of your experiences, education, and so on. So it's in one spot. Okay. So once you've got all of your materials together, the second part of this is thinking about those guiding questions of who is my audience? Who is going to be the recipient of these application materials? What is important to them? Some of my favorite questions to ask students are about the company or the organization's mission, their visions, what are their core values? A lot of them will have that on their website, publicly accessible for people to find. So this is a common question that we ask because the audience, much like you would for if you were giving a presentation or a job talk or anything like that, audience matters. You have to consider who's going to be the recipient of that information and do some work to tailor it towards that role. So this is very similar in that way. One of the number one things that we would ask is, who is this for? Who's going to receive this resume? What's the intended purpose for it? Because that's really going to shape a lot of things moving forward. And you're going to see how that plays out as we go through the rest of this information. But just keep that in mind every time you sit down to put a resume together for a role. Think about it from the employer's perspective. What do you think they're going to be most interested in? And along those lines, taking inventory of what you have. So as you do your research and you have a sense for what the organization is very interested in, what they're looking for in their applicants, what qualifications they desire, then it's time to do some reflection and think about what transferable skills you have that relate to those qualifications. So these are just some examples. There's lots of different lists out there highlighting transferable skills. So these are just some. Obviously, it's not exhaustive, but it is a place to start. Think about what skills they are looking for, and then you take a moment to conduct an inventory of what you have, and just make a list as a place to start. If they're looking for leadership experience, what do you have? What's been your previous leadership experience? If they're looking for technical ability, problem solving, whatever it might be, what kinds of things, experiences, classes, trainings do you have that might be able to speak to that? So again, step one is kind of identifying what the organization is interested in, and then step two is that inventory, that reflection of what do I have that would speak to this. Okay. All right, quick quiz, and I would love for you to participate in the chat. It's a little tough for me to see the chat in this view as much as I'd like to, but how many employers do you think use some kind of software system to screen resumes? I see some already popping up. What do you think, like percentage-wise? What percentage of employers do you think use some kind of software to screen resumes from applications? Okay, so I'm seeing 100%, 90, 195, 80. Y'all are good. You're guessing high. That's good. Yes. So it is, there's different numbers out there. but a lot of them. So we call them applicant tracking systems. You may hear for large organizations, it's 70+%. The last I heard for Fortune 500 companies was over 95% use some kind of applicant tracking system. So an applicant tracking system is just what we were saying about this screening tool. The company puts in there the information that they want the system to look for, and that's how you try to get through that first round to decide if they're going to bring you in for an interview. So this is where tailoring your documents is really important. We're trying to assess, what does the company need? What are they looking for? What do I have? And making sure that your materials speak to that. Another thing that's really important in non-academic resumes and application materials are accomplishment statements. And really what this speaks to are results. If you think about it from an employer's perspective, they are often going to operate off of the idea that your past performance is indicative of your future performance. So if you did something well before, there's a good chance you're going to do that well with them as a new employee. So where accomplishment statements come in is they help to provide the evidence of your past performance. And I'm going to show you some examples of what those look like. So here is a way and an example for building an accomplishment statement. You're using a nice action verb to describe what you did, what your role was. You name the project or the activity that was associated with this role. And then what was the result of that? What was the outcome that you can speak to? So you can see this example is coordinated 3 fundraising events for, I'm gonna lower my screen here a little bit, for local shelters, raising more than $8,000, 20% over goal, greatly improving community awareness. Now, the nice thing about that is I don't have to know exactly what that person's job was. I don't have to know, exactly if there was science behind that and get into the intricacies of that. I can see that this person worked really hard and raised a lot of money and exceeded their goal for that activity. So being very results oriented is particularly helpful in non-academic resumes because they are going to use that information to try to evaluate how well you would do that within their company. Now, something to keep in mind, quantifiables are great. Anytime you can quantify information in an accomplishment statement is fantastic. I know it's not always possible either. That might not always be realistic. So it's a good idea to think about other ways that you have had impact. It doesn't always have to be a dollar amount or a percentage. If you published something, that's an accomplishment, that's impact. If you redesigned something, if you joined your lab and recognized that there was an inefficiency with a procedure or a process or a policy, and you took the initiative to change something, that can all be impactful. So it doesn't necessarily have to be dollar amounts or percentages, but a good activity that I suggest with students is to go through your application documents, look at the descriptions you have of your experiences, and ask yourself, what was the impact of this? What result did this have? There's a difference between listing job duties, the things that you were tasked to do, and accomplishments. And there's a place for both in the resume, but accomplishment statements can be very powerful as a way of providing that evidence of your ability to perform tasks. So here's just some examples of how accomplishment statements or just descriptions in general may look different on a CV versus a resume. I'm not going to read all of these out loud, but just so you can quickly see the difference of how that might be formatted and also described. So in the chat for me, just for this first one, could you share with me some of your reactions to this? What do you notice as the difference between the way it's phrased and formatted in a CV versus a resume? Could you share your thoughts with me via the chat, please? What do you observe? Okay, yep, categorized, quantifiable, action-oriented. Great question. So a question just popped up in the chat of past or present tense for action verbs, and it does depend. So if it is an action that you took that was a one-time event, then that would be past tense. Or if it's an experience that's completely in the past. If it's something that's still, if it's a to present experience or something that you still do on a daily basis, then it's okay for that to be present tense. But if it was, sometimes even in a present tense or a present experience we have, there might have been a task that was a one-time occurrence, and that's okay to put that in past tense. Good question. Yep. Okay, good. So we're starting to see the difference between how things might be formatted or described in a CV versus a resume. Fantastic. Okay. Teaching, another very, very popular category on a CV. Let's see how that might look a little different. Some cases, especially if the CV is geared towards maybe an R1 institution that's more research focused, there might not be a lot of elaboration on the teaching experience part of a CV, but let's see what somebody could do with that on a resume. How do you build accomplishment and impact statements and describe teaching experience on a resume? So we see, again, not necessarily all of these are quantifiable, but you can still see how they relate to impact. If you design something, if you revise something, that definitely has impact. That's a change. It was a change of something. So think about how rich these descriptions can be to really capture what you might do as a TA. Okay. Structure and format. The good news is there's lots of different samples of resumes out there. And there's a lot of ways that you can structure it. You do have a fair amount of latitude with the structure of your document, but there are some things to capture that are fairly standard, that are good to know as you're formatting your document. And it's also important to keep in mind the conventions of any field or sector that you're interested in. So I'll go through this as we work through the rest of the workshop, but it's really important that once you've got a good solid version of your resume that you feel comfortable with, that you check that with people working in your field of interest, just to make sure that there aren't any conventions of that field that we might not yet be familiar with, and that it does reflect what would be most important to that organization. So for example, here are a couple of things that are pretty typical for resume development. As we mentioned before, 1 to 2 pages is typically the maximum. It might depend on the sector. There are still some out there that ask for a 1-page only resume. So you always want to defer to what the instructions are. Margins, you usually see, I've even seen a 1/2 inch to 1 inch all around. Sometimes organizations will be very direct about this and what their expectations are for formatting, so just watch for that too. Otherwise, you can work with the margins a little bit, but you'll notice that the last bullet point is about this balance of text and white space on the resume. Sometimes I've seen resumes where the font is very small and there's not much of a margin, so it's really much edge to edge text, and that can be challenging from a readability standpoint. So keep in mind that balance of, is the document still easily readable? Can you still clearly see my category headings? Does what I want to stand out, does it stand out? And just kind of being aware of that. Font size is usually 11 to 12. I've seen people use 10 as well. I would recommend not going any smaller than size 10. I find that gets challenging, but if you're sticking with a size 11 is usually the one that I see the most. Easy to read fonts are good. Keep it simple. There's very decorative, elaborate fonts out there, but not for a resume. We want to just keep it easy to read. The reason for that, and sometimes people ask that of like, well, why can't I put this on my resume or this on my resume? And what we're trying to do is keep the focus on your skills and your accomplishments. If there's a really decorative font out there, while that could be visually appealing, it could also be seen as a distraction, taking away from your skills and your experiences, which was what we really, really want to highlight. Consistency is huge. Keep in mind that it's much easier for the reader to just flow through the document if things are consistent throughout. So this is a good thing just to check. Are all of your category headers aligned? Are all of your dates aligned? So just go through your resume. Have somebody else check this for you too. I've done it myself where I think I have it laid out and it just takes a different set of eyes to check that for me and make sure that everything looks okay. Okay. The best way to highlight the content in resume. Is it Shaw? Would you mind just elaborating a little bit on that for me? Oh, okay. Bold or underline. So usually you can see, and that's a great question. You can certainly use different things to help highlight category headers and things like that. That being said, you do want to strike a balance with that. I've seen some resumes where so much is done between bolding, underlining, italicizing, where it's almost like nothing is emphasized because so much is emphasized. So you want to choose that carefully. What is really important for you to stand out? And I'll give an example. Sometimes I'll see a resume where the entire first line of somebody's job title, the employer, location, the dates is all bolded. And I understand why, because it's kind of the first line there, and that's what people see. But my question is usually, are dates the most important thing? Are your dates of employment really important that you want them bolded? Because if not, then we want to unbold those things. So keep in mind, it's just those things that you want to make sure that they stand out. Not uncommon to see category headers bolded, and then again, consistency would be an important piece of that. I've also seen category headers all capitalized. So that's a possibility, and not an uncommon approach to things is to put the category headers in capital letters, and that helps them stand out. I should have mentioned too, one thing that's an exception to the font size rule is your name, because we do want that to be very much emphasized on the resume. We want it to be easy to find your name. So that's something that you can make just a little bit bigger, not too much, maybe like a 14 or 16 or something like that. But you do want your name to be emphasized. I typically wouldn't suggest do a lot of bolding in the experience section itself, but just make sure that it's a good balance there. Okay. Good questions. This is not exhaustive, but it's a few common resume sections that you might see. Contact information, obviously very popular. You need to make sure that people have a way to get a hold of you. Still remember to keep that section simple, one email address, one phone number, just so it takes the guesswork out of it for the company, the organization, so they know how to contact you. As I said, with a resume, you have a fair amount of latitude with how you structure it. You see in the fourth bullet point down on the left that it has kind of like insert a word experience. Whatever experience you think is most relevant to the position, you can create a category around that. So you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a category header for research experience, leadership experience. If you were applying to a position that was project management heavy, and you have a lot of project management experience, you might have a project management experience section that captures all of those experiences that you've had. So you can really structure the resume how it best works for you and how it can be very easy, make it easy for the employer to find those skills. I wanted to just walk through an example, and this one is on our website. I will make sure I send this out so everybody has the information. This is just one example that is on our website. But you can see this person was a PhD student, and it just shows you a demonstration of how you can set up a resume. The summary of qualifications, which was noted on the previous slide, is very popular when it comes to a resume because it helps capture the most salient information at the top, makes it very easy for the employer to find those qualifications, and it kind of gives them an idea of what's coming in the rest of the resume. Very common for the education section to still follow the professional summary or summary of qualifications, especially while you're a student, because that's how you identify. And that makes it very easy for the employer to see what your main focus is at that point in time. If you move into an industry position and then you have several years of experience there, your education section might work its way down on the resume. But if you're staying in higher education, academia, then education tends to stay a little bit higher on the document. I know there's a lot of text on here, but just again to see an example of how that experience section might be set up. So the person has their title, their department, the university, dates, and then those accomplishment statements below. And again, you'll see that in these, not every single one of them is going to be quantifiable, but where it's possible, it makes it very easy for the person to see how they performed their job. And again, I'll make sure that you have the link so that you can find these on our website following the workshop, but just so you can see what it looks like. Finally, this is the last part of this person's resume. They have an honors and awards section, publications, and then skills that they decided were important to highlight. And for publications, I have a fair amount of students that will come with this challenge. If they have a lot of publications or presentations, that sometimes can be the most challenging part to consolidate for converting a CV to a resume. So a strategy that you can use to try out is put the word selected in front of those. It's basically a signal, it's a cue to the hiring manager, whoever's reading your materials, that's not capturing, it's not reflective of all of your publications or presentations, but you're noting space constraints and you're highlighting the ones that are most important to you. So using a term like selected publications or selected presentations can sometimes help with that condensing of information. All right, quick quiz now. If you could humor me by throwing some guesses in the chat. How many seconds do you think most employers take to do that initial review of your resume? How many seconds? Let's throw your guesses in there. 10, 90, 30, 15, 50, okay, 30. Other guesses? 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 180. So this is just that first screen, the first quick look at your resume. 30. Okay. You're all being very, very kind. It's about 6 to 7 seconds on average is what we hear. So not to have that be concerning, but if we go back, I'm just going to go back a couple slides. This is where that summary of qualifications or that professional summary can be very, very helpful, because if we know that that hiring manager, that person reading our materials is only taking about 6 to 7 seconds to take a quick look to see if they can find what they're looking for, having that summary of qualifications or a professional summary at the top of the document can be a nice way to catch their attention early on. Now, this section in particular of your resume can change a lot depending on, again, audience. If you think back to that question of who's my audience, this section can change potentially the most out of all the other ones on your resume. But keep in mind, that's a great way to catch them early on if they're only taking about 6 to 7 seconds to look at your materials. Okay, thank you for that. So along those lines, we want to tailor the resume. We want to target it to the position. This helps with the applicant tracking systems. This helps with the hiring manager who's only taking 6 to 7 seconds to look at your materials. Having it be targeted towards that position is very helpful. You want to highlight the relevant skills. You can order your sections by priority and significance. So on the previous slide when we showed the different categories that can go on your resume and we saw research experience, leadership experience, I mentioned project management in there. Depending on what's most important to that position, you decide which one comes first. Is it research experience? Is it leadership? We have to take a look at the position to try to make that judgment call, to the best of our ability. So again, this is where researching really comes into play. Really important to try to understand the organization as much as possible and what's important to them. And network. We have a whole other workshop on networking, and we have lots of tools on our website about how to network and do that effectively. But that's something that can help you to figure out how to tailor these documents. Okay. And then as we wrap this up, another thing to think about is the feedback piece. How do you continue to get feedback on your documents? As you go through your career, your resume, CV, if you end up using that, will continue to evolve as you gain more experiences, potentially additional education, certifications, other credentials. So give feedback on it. It is an always evolving document, so it's good to have other eyes take a look at it for you and give you that feedback. Career Center advisors can be very helpful for that. Postdoc office can be supportive of those that are looking for assistance there. Your peers in your peer group, how did they frame things on their resume? How did they go about that? Do they have advice on some things that might help you if you're struggling with how to word a different experience? Or potentially, sometimes other people are helpful in alerting us to skills and qualities that we have that we might not see in ourselves. So that's why in the beginning I said, get those letters of recommendations out and things like that, because sometimes that's where we can find a lot of great information about ourselves. And this is not always easy. It's not always easy to put a resume together. So I wouldn't feel like you have to figure that all out on your own. This is not something we do every day. We don't sit down and write about ourselves and talk about our accomplishments. And so don't feel like you have to figure that all out on your own. But once you get your first draft down, usually the other ones come a little bit easier from that point on. Mentors, advisors, other people in your network, all of these folks can be tremendously helpful for you as you figure out how to craft these materials for the sector, the industry, the fields that you're interested in. So last quick quiz for this afternoon's workshop. What percentage of jobs do you think are secured through networking? So that means another means that is not just applying online. So I just found it on LinkedIn, I applied through LinkedIn. What percentage of jobs do you think are found through networking? Okay, I'm seeing 80, 90, 75, 66, 60. Great. Other thoughts? Percentage of jobs found through networking. And this is the US, I should stipulate. 30. Okay. All excellent guesses. About 70 to 80%. So the takeaway from that is meet lots of people. They can really, really help you figure out how to tailor and customize your documents. If networking is something that it's not a strategy that you've had to put into place before, again, the Career Center, we can be helpful with that. We do talk through strategy and just trying to get a little bit more comfortable with that and what that looks like and how to do that effectively. But 70 to 80% of jobs are found through networking. And reaching out to people as you ask for advice about things, as you learn about organizations, is a great way to, one, get the information that you're seeking, and two, expand your network. So it can really be very, very beneficial for a couple of reasons there. Okay, so recognizing we've got about 7 minutes or so, I do want to open it up for questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.